Last book. Carla, you might be able to help us with this one. Alessandro Manzoni, The Betrothed.
Yes.
Say the title in Italian.
I Promessi Sposi. It's one of our fundamental books. Everybody knows it. Everybody reads it in school. It's this and La Divina Commedia, which is the Divine Comedy. They are basically the two of the books that are the fundamentals of the Italian language. Italian language is based on these books, especially on Manzoni, like Promessi Sposi, because it's the more recent of the two, and it's one of the, what is the word? The
pillars?
The pillars of our language.
So I feel like this is the equivalent to, like, in French it would be Balzac, and in Spanish it would be Galdós, English would be Dickens. This feels like the equivalent of that, like supreme novelist kind of,
But those are still those are 19th century, right? Is this, what era is this from?
This is 18th century, but the story is dated to the 16th century. So it's the beginning of the story is framed with, the author found this this book.
Published in 1827.
There we go.
So, contemporary.
So, but it's dated in 1600.
With those things.
The whole idea is that the author found this book, and this is the same, which is a device that was used very much in the past. Like, this is a book that I found, and this is what it's saying, right? This is not my doing. I found this from an author from that, and that's how he sells it, being a 1600s.
Also, I didn't know this until I just looked it up, but it was published in 1827 and then rewritten and revised and republished in 1842. So I didn't know that. Not that it makes a massive amount of difference. Anyone listening can probably tell, based on, like I said, it's that type of book and that time period and everything, so it's gonna get a yeah. I really love this one, and of course, so it's called The Betrothed. It is about a couple who are betrothed to each other. You laughed at me because I said my favourite part was like the first 150 pages where they're just together and it's happy, and then I was like, then just cut to the epilogue and skip all the middle.
Like, the middle part, of course, is the interesting parts where all the drama happens, where all the everything, all the.
So you're not a fan of the middle part of David Copperfield?
All right. Oh, this is just for because.
I don't know if you can necessarily say that. I liked all of David Copperfield, I think, especially.
Is it just because this isn't Dickens?
Because of the donkeys. No, I will say I really liked this. Carla, where's your donkeys?
Well, it's donkeys.
I really did like this book. It's
we have fun here.
Here's the problem: is that it's another one of those that's over 700 pages.
It's a really long book, and I'm gonna say we study every word of this book.
Now I've got to bleep that.
Yes, sorry.
Write it down.
But yeah, it's a book that I did really like. So we have this couple who are betrothed, and they have, is it Abbondio? Is that the name of it? Don Abbondio, who's supposed to marry them. That's an interesting joke. I always wanted to use that. If anyone ever asks me, like, will you marry me? I'll say, well, I'm not a priest. I'm not able to marry you, but I will be married to you if you can find someone to marry us. Cancelled. So, wedding cancelled. But,
Yep. All girls like to be talked to that way. Yeah.
They're not gonna go walking.
Carla, as the resident girl. What?
Yes, I would totally walk away from you slowly.
I would like to think
walk around.
I would like to think that unless she's insane, any girl proposing to me would not be shocked by that behaviour, though. Like, she should already know. Otherwise, what is she doing?
That is very good. They would be like,
if we wrote a story about you, it would just be, and then hijinks ensued.
So.
And a soundboard.
Yes. So basically, Don Abbondio is meant to marry them, but he keeps giving them like excuses and putting it off. And our main character is really like shocked by it initially. And he's a bit hapless and a bit naive, I guess, in the beginning at least, and doesn't really understand why the guy won't do the wedding that he's promised to do. And he thinks like, oh my god, my fiancée will never believe this. But when he tells her, she's like, oh yeah, of course, I kind of thought that would happen because Don Rodrigo kind of wanted to marry me, and he's like some rich aristocrat, so he told him not to let the wedding go ahead.
Even more than an aristocrat. Yes, he is that, but he's also like, he's basically, he comes across as what a mafia boss would be like. Basically, he's very. His henchmen are called the Bravi, which are these people who are very...
The Bravos.
Like, yes, very like...
Brava.
It feels very... Of course, he's not mafia or anything, but that is what comes across as.
Yeah. The book begins by telling us about Bravos and a bit of lawlessness. Many points are made about the society in the book and about the fact that the laws weren't even working. Like, okay, the current regime would just be like, here's a bunch of new laws, and then no one would really care, and they would never get enforced, and that's just it, basically. And then they'd be like, okay, here's another bunch of even stricter laws. Mm-hmm. And then they would enforce it for like 2 days, and then it would just get stopped again.
They're quite. They feel like they're quite. They are like.
Stop swearing.
Sorry, no, they're not nice people. Let's say that.
But there is a little bit of bootlicking because they mention, these people enforcing the laws are really bad. Now, for sure, the king and the really important people are good people who care about us and have good laws and want the laws to be enforced in a good way. If only these people meant to enforce them would do a good job.
Yes.
It's like, okay, yes. I don't know if I believe that necessarily, but okay, fair enough. So the first 150 pages is basically what we've talked about, and it kind of ends, in my opinion, like part one of the book with the separation. They just like, and this happens in like a lot of Dickens novels as well, but it's like, well, off we go, exiled to somewhere else, never to see my friends again, goodbye. And I always love that melodramatic moment in any book, because it's always kind of needless as well.
And they're on a boat, and she's looking at the sky, and it's very, very melodramatic.
Yeah. So the best part of the book, some would say. In a way.
I disagree, but...
In a way. So then they're separated. Am I right in thinking that the girl goes to like a convent for a while?
Where we meet one of my favorite characters.
Ah, which one?
The Monaca di Monza.
Ah, okay.
Which she's a nun, but we have a backstory of her. She's like, she slept with this guy while she was a nun, and it's all very telenovela, very dramatic, and she's described very much like, oh, she's this beautiful woman, but she looks very tormented. I like her.
Good, because I wasn't going to say anything about that time
Right.
period. She was in a convent for a while.
She's an important character, just what I say.
And the guy is going around doing some, almost in a picaresque kind of way that I know it's not your favorite, Alex, but he's just kind of like going around places, trying to like do some work and do some odd jobs or whatever, and trying to kill some time.
It can be fine for like a chapter or two, for example. But if it's like 200 pages of that, I'm kind of out.
Well, this book does use the Anna Karenina method of like really stretching out the time, unfortunately.
It's kind of like what
the farming bit.
Yes, like books of the time is like, oh, because you are not going to be able to see it, I have to explain every part of this. Even if it's out.
So we have a guy called the Unnamed. So
my favorite character.
He's a
I thought it was the other one.
Well, my favorite main character.
Listeners, Carla's just lied to you.
No, I have characters that I like. Listen, I like this book.
So, basically the girl gets kidnapped. And Don Rodrigo has kind of been behind this, but he's told the Unnamed to do it. A little bit of like... Well, basically, he's told the Unnamed to do this kidnapping, and... There's a bit of a salvation story then almost, because the Unnamed has done some crimes and things like that before. He lives in a cool castle. He employs some bravos as well, this type of stuff. But then when they see the girl, maybe it's a bit sexist. It's just because she's beautiful, I think. But they're just like, we can't be mean to this girl.
The idea is like, it is very preposterous.
She's beautiful.
It's like, oh.
This is your morality, though.
Are you? Well,
she can't go to jail. She's pretty.
No, it's not exactly that. All right, he is this... Okay, he's an older man. And he's kind of... You know that he had this horrible life of sins and like misdeeds and all of this. He lives in a castle on top of a mountain, and when she gets there are lightnings. On the,
it's just Dracula.
Yes, he's Dracula.
He's Dracula.
There is, actually, the castle, there is a place in Italy where they say that on the Lago di Como, where they say that the castle is, you can visit it if you want to. But he sees her, and he's already, you kind of get the gist that he's towards the end of his life, and he's already resenting what he did because he's afraid of the God's judgments, basically. and she is so pious, and she is so...
She's a bit boringly pious.
She's a wet blanket, basically. She's very innocent, and this innocence really gets to him, and it's kind of like, oh, this is the last drop for him to turn, and he decides, oh, this is going to be my good deed. This is when I change. This is when I make right to the world, and he decides to help her.
I kind of would have preferred him to stay as a villain.
I love him as a villain,
but he kind of turns good, and then tries to like make amends for a bunch of stuff and do a lot of good actions, and it's like, oh, okay. But
it's interesting for the story.
To get rescued, she makes a prayer to the Madonna that she will stay a virgin, basically. So then she gets rescued, and they send Don Abbondio to pick her up as well. He's like, I'm your parish priest, here I am to save you. It's like, well, you've done nothing, you've just been called in to help out.
Don Abbondio is basically the comic relief of this book. Like, he's this, like, man who cannot stand for himself.
Yeah.
He's very sheepish, let's say.
Yeah.
And he's in contrast with Don Cristoforo, who is the guy who absolutely from the beginning wants to marry Renzo Lucia, wants to help them.
In the middle of all this, like, plague is happening, and there's like a lot of people getting sick and everything, and she gets let go but ends up sick, and they have like thousands of people in this one place that they're kind of keeping all the sick people. So when our guy goes away for a long time, and then he's like, you know what, I guess enough plot has happened, it's time for me to come back and find my girl again. So he then goes to try to help her, and I don't want to sort of spoil how it ends, but she's made a vow to remain a virgin.
I'm guessing she doesn't.
Well,
he wants to come back and help her, but he then asks Father Cristoforo, the other priest, to help him, but he's not that interested in helping him at this point, because he's like, I also want to get revenge against Don Rodrigo, and he's like, we do not tolerate revenge in the church.
Also, well, I don't know if it's... Should I spoil what happens?
Spoil a little bit, go ahead.
Well, basically, Renzo, who's the male protagonist, let's say, he's supposed to marry Lucia, he meets Don Rodrigo in the place where all the people affected by plague are and Don Rodrigo is dying.
Yeah.
And that is the moment in which Renzo goes from, oh, this is, I want revenge, I want this... He sees his suffering. And I think Don Rodrigo even kind of, I don't know if he apologizes to him or something like that. And he turns around and is like, oh, this is another person who's dying of the plague.
But that annoyed me. So now that you've mentioned it, I'm going to go into that a bit more. It annoyed me because Renzo doesn't really fix anything. He doesn't defeat Don Rodrigo. Don Rodrigo just dies of plague. So essentially, his story is, I want to marry this girl, this rich guy won't let me, so I just have to wait until he dies, and then I can marry the girl. He doesn't win.
But it's not, there is the interesting part to me. It's not about, he's like, this is...
They could have fought a duel.
But that's not the point of the book. The book is very, like, it has, of course, a sort of Catholic... sort of angle to it because it's Italy.
And I think there's some attempt to put together like the plague and the degradation with like the moral degradation and that type of thing.
It's the sort of thing that is like it's about it's more a bit more on the real side than like the adventurous and like let's just duel, it's a bit more, this is a person.
It's more Dickens than Dumas, is essentially
literally his thought process, this is a person and they're dying.
Yeah.
And to me that was a bit, in some way, deeper than...
Yeah, I think that's fair. But really, really good book, absolute classic. I haven't read that much Italian literature on the show, so it's really good to cover such a classic. I don't think I want to say anything else, because I don't want to spoil how it ends and stuff like that, whether they get together and things. It's a bit disappointing that the Unnamed starts to do too many good deeds, is the only thing I'll say, because then there's no threat anymore. The plague is the biggest villain in a way.
It's true. He is supposed to be Dracula, and then if Dracula starts to be all nice and everything, it's kind of... But it's kind of this sort of, again, very Catholic, redeeming of everybody, which can be a bit annoying, but it's the idea of the time.
Well, anyway, that's all the books.